So I'm going to do this recording and make it available for on the portal for people who are not able to make it. So if you know of people, colleagues, and so forth who would want to be able to see this, please, we'll make the link available and you can forward it to them. Okay, so going back to the release notes here, the previous release notes exist on this page here. So if you recall, I, from the homepage, just selected the release notes section. And the archive, the previous release notes are down here, so you can go back on a release by release basis to see what features are associated with each release. Today we'll be looking at 1.14. So to kick things off, let's take a look at the client enhancements. The honest truth of the 1.14 release is that it is almost exclusively focused on what we're calling resiliency here internally. 2018 was just a gigantic year for us in terms of growth along a couple of key areas. Of course, on the customer front, we signed what we think is a pretty unprecedented number of customers onto our platform. We've also launched a very healthy number of those now. We're chipping away at the time that it takes to get a customer from the time of signing to the time that they are ready to go to launch to market. We're minimizing that as much as possible going forward. As a result, we're seeing a bunch of new customers on the platform, a bunch of new channels on the platform, and a bunch of new users on the platform, all of which we're seeing grow at, we're understanding now what those growth rates are, the coefficients are. And in order to prepare for what we think is going to be a continued year of growth in 2019, we looked at some of the areas in the product that we felt like were most needing to be addressed from a stability and resiliency perspective. Just what are the chinks in our armor, and let's make sure that we get those resolved right now to prepare for 2019. So our 1.14 release is almost exclusively around that resiliency effort. And we'll be happy to dive into more specifics if you guys have those questions. Oops, excuse me. Let's see here. A couple of people chatting me. Okay. All right. So sorry about that, folks. So the resiliency, what we're looking at here is the client enhancements on 1.14. You'll notice that there are server enhancements as well. We have two different types of customers at MobiTV. There are those that use what we call our managed service, and this is where you can kind of think of it as TV as a service, where instead of hosting your own data center and investing in your own infrastructure, you can use MobiTV's data center infrastructure and benefit from the national feed integrations that we have done as part of our transport rights to make it so that regardless of where you are across the country, if you are a broadband provider in any way, that you would be able to have all of the features and functionality of MobiTV without having to worry about the headache of the head end. So for customers who kind of fall into that bucket, you guys are primarily going to focus on these client enhancements because the server side of things, anything that we do on the server is going to be sort of behind, under the hood, so to speak, for you guys and manifested through these clients enhancements here. If you are what we call an in-network customer, which is the type of customer who has their own data center already and installs our software therein, and you guys in those scenarios will be taking our new server releases and making sure that those are deployed across your data center. And for those customers, these server feature callouts here are pretty important in terms of identifying areas of the service that you may want to focus your own internal QA on. But for the sake of, for the bottom line for everybody is that these are relevant, the client enhancements. This is what changes the user will see inside of the actual app experience. And you'll notice that it's a pretty short list here. So there are 3 items. Just to give you a little bit of a comparison, if I go back to the release notes here, I was just kind of going through some of the stuff that we had previously shipped. If you go down to 1.9, for example, this is when we were heavily focused on features. enhancements to existing features, new features overall. And when we kind of fully dedicated our releases to feature work, we had some pretty good velocity in terms of getting through scheduled features. But as I mentioned before, these release notes for 1.14 are a little bit less focused on features and more on the resiliency. A couple other things we're focused on though in 1.14, so I'll call out this one right at the top, the migration to national channels from our 1.1 channels. So for some of our early customers, before transport rights were completely secured for a handful of the networks, for example, Turner with TNT and so forth, they do have a bunch of requirements that we needed to meet on the technology side in terms of how we handle their content when we use our transport rights. So certain things like audience measurement and being able to support blackouts for their NBA and TNT, for example, being able to make sure that all of those ducks are in a row was something that had been, was work that had been invested into the platform over previous releases. And what we did in 1.14 was we made it so that when we actually transitioned users over from the one-to-one channel approach over to the one-to-many approach, that there was nothing weird when we did that. So for example, like recordings that were made or scheduled on a channel that is considered one-to-one or a local channel, let's say TNT in one area that is now going to be benefiting from our national feeds. When we make that migration over, do all of those scheduled recordings and so forth, where applicable, where it makes sense to do it. Does it make sense to actually migrate that stuff over? And that's something that we focused on in 1.14 as well. The resiliency I mentioned before, just some specifics there. One of the things that we really focused on, we noticed some chinks in our armor were around how the client was handling certain error situations. So when a particular service is struggling, which we're committed to making that as rare as possible, but when it does happen, which is just the case with software, every single service out there needs to be able to respond quickly to issues that are having an impact to stability, of course, but also we want to make sure that our applications, when the server is not able to get to respond as quickly or in the way that the client is expecting, that the client doesn't freak out. In other words, that the app doesn't like have a really hard time with it. So we call that graceful error handling. So making sure that the user experience is as good as possible, given any sort of struggles that may be occurring on the server. Again, trying to make those as minimal as possible, but when they do happen, we want to be able to handle them well. The other thing that we don't want to do is, and this is an example of not handling it well, and not necessarily from a user experience perspective, but when a server response, when it fails, when we make a request and it fails, there are certain scenarios, the stream counter here, the stream manager components on our server, for example, when our clients were not getting the proper response from the stream manager, our clients started retrying at a pretty high frequency against the service on the stream counter side. And the result of that was that it sort of presented more load onto the server than we should have, than what is ideal. And so one of the things that we did in 1.14 is we made sure that those types of things across the types of components that could lead to issues if the retry logic is not right, that we address those. So those are kind of the specifics that were handled on the client. And it's kind of easy to say, but less easy to execute across all of the different areas of our apps. We kind of really took a close look from a code review perspective at the areas that could most be fortified for the future, and that's what we focused on in 1.14. You'll also notice that there's the Amino Managed Set-Top Box demo here. So I'm not going to call this full support, just because what we did is we worked pretty closely with Amino to make sure that we could support an implementation that shows roughly what the experience would look like for people who are interested in the Amino Managed Set-Top Box. In prior releases, we also did similar effort with Kaon Managed Set-Top Boxes. And so the types of integration points that you should be thinking of are all of the buttons on the remote control mapped the way that we would like them to be to the application in a managed set-top box situation. Does the app engage with the operating system or the home of the OS and the out-of-box experience in the way that we would expect. Is the performance of the application on some of these boxes up to snuff, making sure that there's just no weirdnesses. And that is something that we did with Immuno in the 1.14 release. When we ran through a QA cycle of all the work that we did to support the demo, we identified a couple of things that we'd like to fix in a future release, but we do believe this is something that if you're interested in seeing it, we'd be able to at least from a technological perspective, support that sort of ability for you to demo that box. Okay, so that was our 1.14 client enhancements. I'm going to go back over to the slide to see if there are any questions from our folks. I'm not seeing any chats in my chat box here, so I think that we are looking okay. If you guys do have questions, please feel free to reach out via the chat box here. As I mentioned before, that we are recording this so that people who are not able to make it in person or live will be able to still get some value out of it later. Okay, let's see here. Going back over to the 1.14 client enhancements, if you guys have questions in the future on things that are presented here in the release notes, you can come down here and leave comments or questions. And we look at these comments and questions on a daily basis, right? So if there are, you know, if you're like, okay, well, I see that you're all focused on resiliency, but I'd like to have a better understanding what you guys are focused on, I'd be happy to respond to that. And I think that for the community of customers who's visiting this page, anytime that there is a question that, you know, that we can answer, I think that just adds value overall to this page in particular and overall to the knowledge base. So please feel free to engage with the articles and ask your questions and add your comments. I think that would be fantastic. Also, you know, one good way to see what other people are saying or questions that people are asking with regard to any of the features called out here, you can follow the page and you'll receive an email every single time that there is a change to the page, whether it's a new comment or an edit to the items here. One thing that we have aspirations to do a little bit better job of calling out, putting some meat onto these particular enhancements, and so potentially starting with 1.14 over the coming week or so, we can add some more description around what it means to support the managed set-top box demo. But for now, we just wanted to at least get the high-level summary out there for you guys to be aware. Okay, I think that's good enough to move on. Let's move on to the server enhancements. Again, this is predominantly a stability, performance, resiliency release. So I'll talk more about these things here, but in addition to that effort, as part of our transport rights, we also enhanced our dynamic blackout adapter to support Turner channels. So now we support Fox and Turner from a blackouts perspective, which for our in-network customers who have multiple DMAs is hopefully a valuable feature, just meaning that you'll be able to take in one feed if we're able to set it up this way, and then redistribute that one feed across all of your areas while still honoring the blackout requirements from Turner in the same way that you'll also be able to do it from Fox now. You'll see in our scheduled releases that we're planning on enhancing the adapter for ESPN, NFL, and NBCU. So there's a lot of work going into what is a pretty complicated, just a tricky feature. It basically relies on our technology to monitor the signaling that is in band, or basically embedded into the feeds coming into our national data center, and based off of those triggers or markers in the feed, handle them based off of who the user is and where they are and what the requirements are from the content provider. It's all very tricky stuff, but our team has done a fantastic job of getting that out the door. And then from the stability perspective, we focused on the services in our backends that were that we felt would really benefit most from prepping for 2019. We noticed a couple of scenarios where our recording manager was not performing the way that we would expect, and so we really dedicated our 1.14 release to understanding that, what the root causes were, what the right solution is, making sure that in the future we're in a position to catch anything that could cause ultimately a negative user experience. We want to catch those well in advance of them becoming a reality in production. So that's kind of where we're at on the server side. All right, I'm going to go back over, see if we have any questions. Looks like we do have a couple of questions. All right, so if we're currently waiting for 1.13 client push, will the 1.14 be soon after? And do we need to open a Jira case to get scheduled? This is from John. Okay, so yeah, it's a great question. So we're talking about 1.14 right now, guys, and this is, all of the features that you're seeing here are associated with what we call our reference implementation, and that is the bottom line feature set across, it represents every single feature that does exist inside of the platform. As you guys know, we can configure the service to have certain features or not have certain features, and same thing with channels, and just the way that the integration works is slightly different from one customer to another. However, 99% of the functionality is the same, and so you guys are I think you'll be able to benefit from this sort of common language knowledge base here. But it doesn't mean necessarily that when we make a 1.14 release available, for example, that your specifically branded version of that application, in other words, your implementation specific to you, it does not mean that you will get that release the moment that we make 1.14 available. What has to happen is we spend a few days to a week making sure that the enhancements to the reference application, when they are manifested in your branded version of the application, that there are no issues that cropped up through that translation. And so we need a couple of days to make sure that's working as expected. And so the 1.13 release, you may still be on 1.13, or maybe even 1.13 is around the corner for you guys in terms of when you are prepared to actually push the 1.13 release out to production. And so this is really the cutting edge of feature set that is available on MobiTV. If you would like to get access to the features in any particular release, we just, for our managed service customers, we will be deploying our server on your behalf. But it is still up to you guys to make sure that you are working closely with your account manager to get your branded version of the application prepared for the stores and out the door. And so if you have questions around that process, I'd recommend reaching out to your account manager. All right, let's see here. We have a question from Ed McDonald. Why are recordings made on Turner Nets prior to national launch? Is it technical or legal reasons? Why are recordings made on Turner Nets prior to national launch? So I'm not exactly sure if I'm understanding the question exactly, but if the question is around Turner support before the national launch, what we did in order to meet the requirements from Turner is to just treat those national channels as if they were local channels. So we would pull in the feed, the Turner feed that's associated with the geographical area of your areas, and then make sure that the right feed is used in those areas. And it's just we're treating it as like a local feed. And so all of the functionality should exist and be compliant when we treat it that way. What we've enhanced the platform to do is to not treat those Turner channels as a local feed, to treat them as national feeds and to still honor all the requirements in terms of blackouts. So hopefully that answers your questions there. And then, so we had a question around the ESPN, the schedule for ESPN dynamic blackouts. So I do have, we'll go through that in our upcoming scheduled releases. I believe we have that scheduled for 1.16, potentially 1.17, or excuse me, 1.15 or potentially 1.16. Okay, I think those are all the questions. I'm going to come down here to the known and fixed issues. So this is a pretty important part we've noticed for the handoff process from our team to you guys' team, is to help your team across all the different functions understand what is true in terms of the issues that were experienced in the previous release or in previous releases. So as you guys know, we support the experience across Android, Apple. That includes not only TVs, but also mobile and tablet, Roku, and web. And then, of course, for in-network customers, we have these platform known issues as well. Platform is, we often refer to our server side as our platform. Okay, so so on the Android side, just wanted to call out a couple of things. These are these are summaries of the issues. So this, for example, on Android represents 4 or 5 items here that we thought you guys would most want to know about. At the bottom of the page, if you scroll down here, there are a bunch of reports that we've attached. This is straight out of our issue tracking software. And so it's a little bit of drinking from the fire hose, but there are all of the issues that you see here in the summary, as well as some of the what we believe to be less important features, or not features, issues associated with the release, so that if you are seeing something, for example, you may want to come and look through the lists here associated with the platform that you saw the issue on, and see if it's a known issue. And if it's not, that's a great opportunity for you guys to reach out to us and make sure that we're tracking those issues. So let me know if you have any questions around these attachments here. The way that you can let me know if you have questions is just you can dump them right here in the comments, or you can, of course, reach out to your contacts on the MobiTV side. Okay, so scrolling up here to the fixed issues. So these are the things that existed as known issues in 1.13 but are now fixed. So there were some issues on the Kaon firmware integration, like the Kaon managed set-top box. I think you could argue they're a little bit edge casey, but still important enough for us to address. So after you do like a hard reset, we were having issues with the app launching on the managed set-top box, so we were able to fix that. One of the buttons was not mapped correctly to the experience that we expected on the live button. And so those are both fixed on the Kaon side. We also noticed there are a couple of things that, from a user experience perspective that are annoying. For example, in certain cases when you are using thumbnail, when you're seeking, the thumbnail in thumbnail seek gets frozen. I think this happens around some specifically known cases, one of which is when we transition from our sort of under the hood recording when a user pauses live and getting back to the live point when you're transitioning from that live buffer to the catch-up asset. I've noticed that there are some issues there, and there may be others. So, or there were others, excuse me. So those were things that were addressed in the Android side. This is this issue around migrating from the one-to-one to one-to-many feeds. This is one of the things that we tackled as part of 1.14, and then going live on the TV in certain cases when you fall behind the live point as a user. There's supposed to be a button in the control drawer for the media controls that allows you to go live that is not showing up in some cases. The user in those cases can still seek to live. They just need to do it the old-fashioned way as opposed to jumping to live. So hopefully this is not too much detail for you guys, but I think that it is useful. And so I got to keep my eye on the time here, but I think that it is this level of granularity is what I think might be the right mix of trying to make sure that you folks are aware of, the rubber hits the road details, as well as not getting too much into the weeds that it, is a yawn for everybody. So hopefully I'm right about that. I apologize if I'm not. On the Apple side, this is a good example of where if you guys are sort of, you have questions around what specifically is associated with these issues, I think that it's fair to sort of come and ask a question down here. For example, I would say that this is a little bit too generic of a headline for this crash here. Maybe so what I would expect going forward, and I'll take a note here to do this offline, is to make sure that there's enough explanation here that you understand what the issue is, so you can be prepared. Also, if you are finding yourself wanting for more information, like I mentioned before, you can scroll down to the actual lists and get a full description of the issue. Okay, so channel change and inline info module with this particular channel, there were some issues with the performance around that and the way the metadata was being presented. They were fixed, and then also we noticed some auto suggestions when you start to type in the search experience. The things that were being returned based off of as when you enter on a character by character basis as suggestions for things that we think you're trying to search for, those were they weren't looking right, and so there was some updates to that service to make sure that we're trying to give as relevant as auto suggestions as possible. On the Roku side, some of the issues that we fixed were around the there was some lagginess on a particular model, this Roku Ultra model. I actually might glaze over a couple of these. So there was a crash that happens. It's not that a user can't get back into the app or anything like that. When there's an app crash, of course, it's not a great experience, and so we need to fix those as much as possible. This is an example where we did make one of those fixes. Or when a user was deleting a recording of a movie, it was crashing the app for some reason, and so we were able to fix that. So on and so forth. There's one in particular that I thought was a little unruly. We were having some issues across multiple platforms on the authentication components. So our auth manager was kicking users out. The way that it was working with Roku, at least after 48 hours, we were able to fix that. Web, you'll notice here, is missing. So we're on a tiny bit of a different schedule with web. They are not a client the same way that the other apps are. They're sort of, when we deploy web, it's on the server, and so oftentimes it gets a little bit off schedule. But once we get the final list of known issues and fixed issues from web later this week, we will make sure that they're updated here. And then on the platform side, there were a couple of issues I think that were pretty important to be fixed, one of which was this metadata ingestion issue. Some providers of metadata, or excuse me, some sources of content were passing over information to hold on one second here, folks. So the metadata was coming in, and in certain scenarios, when it was a movie, it was being marked as a show. So the movie would show up in show sections of the website, and vice versa. So shows were being marked as movies, and so we needed to change the translation of the metadata that we were getting from those sources. That was fixed, and then also we enhanced the imagery. We chose the right image to show on sporting event details in this release. In the previous releases, we were using too generic of an image. It was more like a basketball image as opposed to, let's say, the Golden State Warriors. If they were playing a game, we'd want to have a more relevant sort of event-based image. And so those two things are now true in the platform. Okay, so those are the fixed issues for 1.14. I'm going to come back over here, see if we have any questions. We do have a question from Rick here. Current timeout for a stream is 4 hours. Is there any way that can be changed? That is configurable. It is configurable, but it is not service-wide. It is implementation-wide. So for your particular implementation across all users, if you want to set the stream to timeout at 3 hours, for example, you could do that. And then if another customer of ours wanted to keep it at 4, that would be fine, and they can be different. Let's see here. So can that time be changed individually by account, or is it universal? Yeah, so exactly. This particular feature of having within the same implementation multiple stream limits is not currently supported, so that would be a feature request that we'd have to prioritize. But there are some questions around bulk video, the way that we could actually take the restaurant lounge scenario that you're talking about and make it work for that case is to have, I think there are some scenarios that we could talk about offline. Also, another question from Ed McDonald: why do you have a different look and feel for playback recordings instead, or based on whether a series or a movie? Off the top of my head, I'm not sure about that. I know that the look and feel of the media player for recordings in general represents the same look and feel that was true during the live playback of the particular program. So that should be similar. There may be some small differences as you go from VOD and linear, just because the metadata that we see in those different scenarios is potentially different. If you're referring to, when you go to the recording section of the application, why that looks slightly different compared to, a details page for content. We did that just because we felt like we needed a dedicated position for all the recordings. But happy to answer your question in more detail if I didn't answer it sufficiently. Okay, so moving down from fixed issues, let's move down to the known issues here. So these are the things that you guys need to be aware of that exist in 1.14. We have an outstanding issue on Android with people being logged out in scenarios where we wouldn't expect it. We actually noticed this in 1.12. I think one of our customers made us aware of the issue, and so we made a fix to the issue in 1.12, and through our testing of 1.12, we're not able to reproduce it after we made that fix. Then we noticed it crop up again once we had pushed to production, and so we tried to fix the new manifestations of this issue that showed up in production. We tried to make those fixes in 1.13. And again, I think that we were able to fix what we were able to reproduce. And then we still notice that we have customers, we're not actually able to reproduce this as often. And I think it does happen on an implementation by implementation basis. For scenarios where this is still happening, most of our customers are not experiencing this, but if you are experiencing it, one thing that we have decided to do in this last release is to begin a design of kind of like a refactor of our authentication manager to make sure that any cruft that exists in that code that may be causing some of these issues, that those get just rooted out. And so that we can have like a sort of a fresh take on authentication manager to get to some of these issues that we're having a hard time identifying. So if you are a customer that is experiencing these unintentional logouts, that is the light at the end of the tunnel. The testing that we're doing here, we're not seeing it as often as we used to. It's fairly rare, to be honest, but we are seeing this need to update the authentication manager. Kaon, there's sort of this residual bug on the voice to text not working the way that we were expecting it to. So that's just specific to the Kaon experience. The issue that, so that there is an outstanding issue, it looks like, on Android with what we were describing before and the other issues where series are still showing up in the movies row. So that occurrence of that should be a lot less, but it is still happening. And then the couple of other cases here, play most recent button, when there's only one asset available for a particular series, and if that happens to be a recording, when you're at the series level and you see a button that says play most recent, and when you hit that play button, in this very specific case, when it is a recording and when it is the only one, we're not seeing it work. You can still play the recording when you go to the details page, but from this like shortcut location, it's not working. Okay, and then on the series recording options, so this is, again, just kind of handling the weirdness associated with moving from our local one-to-one approach on our now one-to-many national feeds. So this issue here, when we do decommission a local channel, there are certain scenarios where it can kind of come up and cause a slight weird user experience, but I think that it is rare enough to sort of not happen as often as as you might expect. So when these decommission channels, we're basically hiding them from all of the UI except for in very specific cases. and then there's also some data that we need in order to make playback of those assets available, and that's one of the issues that is still sort of causing problems unless we sort of handle it manually. So if you are having issues with the recordings that were previously associated with local channels when we move to the national, please reach out to your account manager. On the Apple side, there are a couple of issues. One of them is the handling of how we transition back and forth between LivePoint and catch-up. So we talked about this on the fixed issues up above. I believe that those fixed issues were on the Android side. On the known issues side, it's still an existing issue on Apple. And so it doesn't actually cause too crazy of a user experience, except for that the user often doesn't know when they are in a scenario where if they leave the channel and come back, it starts over at the live point. And so it's more of like a user education problem that we plan on fixing in the future. There's also a scenario here on Apple where content that is TVMA content can appear when the user has set parental controls. And parental controls are generally, we are attempting to remove TVMA content from our feature pages in cases where the user has turned on parental controls in certain cases. And so that is generally working, except for in one case where when there are multiple sources for the same content, and each of those sources has a different parental rating. One has TVMA and one has TV14. What happens is that the TV14 thing can trigger it as a relevant result for programs that meet the criteria of parental controls. Even though it also has, when the user chooses playback, it will show them an option that has the TVMA option there. The user won't be able to play the TVMA content, but they will be able to see it. So, children who are trying to play that TVMA content still have to enter a PIN to be able to get in. It's just we're in this particular case not removing the item from being viewed in the first place the way that we would expect. So that's something that we'll fix in the next release. That same sort of problem is actually applying to the related to section on the details page. So that, of course, users won't be able to play back the restricted content, but they can see it in those cases where we would prefer not to. Okay, and then recommendations. Delete all recordings from scheduled page, removes the scheduled items. Okay, so on the Roku side, there's like this batch recording scenario on Roku where when you try to delete all of the recordings, it also removes the scheduled items on Roku. And so that bulk action is causing the user to unschedule future programs. So they have to, it's not like they won't be able to reschedule it, but it is this kind of annoying bug that can happen for only those users who are trying to do that bulk action. Channels with the TBD guide data. So in particular cases, we have channels that don't have any guide data that comes from Gracenote or from the content provider. And so our app was just not set up to play that content. And so that is something that we're still trying to fix on Roku, what we have already fixed on some of our other platforms. And then, yeah, so a couple of more items here. Just the thing that's supposed to be playing when you finish a playback of another asset, all those things are kind of known issues here. If you have any questions about the specifics of this stuff, please just reach out. All right, on platform side, there is an issue that has gotten a little bit of attention from our customers. We're actually not seeing it as much here internally and when we do our testing, but we have been able to reproduce it. So we think that it's associated with a recent update from Apple on how, like, the very sort of technical details of how its media player streams files. And so what we're noticing is that in cases where our live segmenters are not responding as quickly due to, let's say that the segmenter just has, you know, a higher number of channels on it than other segmenters. For whatever reason, it's just going slower. The Apple Player is not handling that the same way that it used to. So we believe that we have a fix for this. It is currently underway. And the actual user experience associated with this is that the user, even though their network is good, in certain cases we'll see the bitrate profile shift from the highest profile down to a lower profile, and then, you know, down again or back up again. It's just kind of, it's getting confused on which profile to use. And so that's something that we're actively working on the Apple side. And then there's also just a couple of things that are going back to some of the resiliency stuff, making sure that our services that are you know, lagging behind when certain updates are made, for example, on these policy changes, like if a channel says, all right, we no longer support start over for whatever reason, the time that it takes to actually cascade that policy change to all the content associated with that channel is not, we want that to go faster. And so we have that as an outstanding bug. Okay, that's a lot of conversation, a lot of talking from me. Let me come back over here. So no new questions on known issues, which is fantastic. I am going to unmute you folks now just for a moment and switch over to, I just want to get your feedback as I switch over to this webcam. Hopefully you guys have not been looking at me the whole time, because that would be very boring. Let's see here. So let's unmute all.
Yeah.
All right, I have 80 people who are unmuted, so there might be a little bit of background noise right now. I am going to, so can someone, are you guys able to see my screen right now?
Great.
Seeing my head this whole time.
What's up? What's up, chicken butt?
I've had some difficulties viewing the screen, but for the most part, it's working.
Okay, so are you guys seeing my screen or are you seeing my head?
Both.
You're seeing both? Oh my gosh, okay.
It
Cool.
seems to view, but there's limited options.
Okay. Well, I apologize for everybody that's had to look at me this whole time. I'm going to switch over to, I'm going to mute you all again. Hopefully the experience has not been too crazy with this software. I apologize if it has. I'm going to mute you again and go back to a demo of the talking guide here. Okay. Let's see here. Actually, I'm going to do this. Okay. I can't actually see how this is framed right now. So if it is not framed well, someone please let me know. Can someone chat actually for me in the chat dialogue if you guys are able to see this Apple TV right here? So I want you guys to be able to see whatever is in view here in the TV. Can someone chat for me into that box? Okay, all right, I'm getting some feedback. It looks like it is working. Okay, very cool. So I am going to make sure that we have enough volume here. The feature that I'm going to demonstrate for you guys today is the talking guide, the Audible accessible guide. And so I'm going to demonstrate the C Spire TV app on Apple TV. In order for it to work, inside of the release notes for 1.13, if you go back into the portal, you will be able to see specific instructions on how a user, what a user would need to do in their settings for their device in order to turn on the Audible accessible feature. So in the case of Apple TV, what you do is you come to the general settings area, come down to accessibility, and then come down to VoiceOver and turn that on.
VoiceOver on. VoiceOver on. 1 of 2. VoiceOver on.
1 of 2. Portrait.
Okay, so Apple TV has its own handling. What we're doing now is looking at the Apple TV settings app. And I've turned the voiceover feature on. So every single time that I take an action or put the focus onto a new item, what the expectation is that in this case, it looks like Samantha will be telling us what we're doing inside of the app. So I'm going to come back home to the home screen.
Computer, C Spire TV, Beta, Row 5, column 1.
Okay. And for you folks who are on the phone, if you cannot hear Samantha talking, Samantha is our robot friend for the day. If you cannot hear her, you're missing the point of the demo. So please make yourself known if you're not able to hear it. I can turn up the volume. All right, so we're looking here at C Spire TV. When I open up the application,
Rick and Morty, video issue.
oh, that's
And
no
no
good.
error, recordings and settings.
All right, I was playing around with this beforehand. So this is the normal experience when you launch the application, you start playing the last played channel. If you engage with the media player, let's see here.
Recordings and settings.
So come over here to guide, select guide.
Stars Comedy. Beauty Shop on Stars Comedy. Channel 980. On now. 1 of 96.
Beautiful.
Play. Beauty Shop. Guide. 9. Record. Full details. Beauty Shop.
So as you can tell, as I move from one action to another, it starts to call out the
Full
label.
details. Beauty
So let's
Shop.
just go to the full details page here.
Beauty Shop. Beauty Shop. 2005 comedy PG-13. Far from Chicago. Hairdresser.
So it'll start automatically reading the description. That's what it's doing now. And it literally reads every single character. So in the case where we have these little decorative dots here, it'll read out its understanding of those characters.
Jorge Kevin Bacon. More info.
So you can go to more info, you can set a recording here.
Record. Airing now 52 minutes remaining. Record. Today at 5 p.m. on Stars Comedy. Are you sure? You have 78 minutes of space left. Recording this program may delete older recordings. Call 855-438-1009 to purchase more space. Brexit cancel. Manage cancel. Continue. Selected. Cancel recording. Beauty Shop. Recording set.
Okay.
Recording
All right.
cancel.
So I think you guys kind of get the idea here. The
30 for 30.
The experience is basically the same across all of the different
2000 Macmillan record.
all of the different platforms, but there are some differences, of course, as you go from one to another, because it's really the technology of Google and Apple and Roku and Amazon and so forth who is powering this. We've just set up our applications to consume that feature set created by Google and so forth in the right way. So for your FCC requirements that were in play as of end of last year, this from 1.13 going forward, you'll have this feature set that you're seeing right now. We can go through all of it. So as you come into shows, for example.
NBA game time. NFL football. News. The Weather Channel live. Sports on now. First take. 9 to 11 play. First take.
Okay, so let's see. What else can I show you? There's a recently watched.
28 days. 2000. ESPN live. Sports Center.
Okay,
Search.
and then
Recordings and settings. Manage settings.
you know, all of the stuff. One thing that Apple does that's a little bit funny is in the settings, for example, it does this all throughout the OS.
E1.13.0. 36. 1 of 7.
So what it does is it says, hey, there's 7 items in this list. So it says item 1 of 7, and then it reads out what the title of the thing is. So in this case, it's who's watching. And so there's just some like odd handling in some cases you may not disagree with, but that has been sort of accepted by the by Apple's legal team, I'm sure, in terms of making sure that it is up to snuff from the FCC perspective. Okay, so if you guys have any questions about this, let me know. I'm going to go ahead and get out of that demo.
Fire TV, data, row 5, column 1. Computer, LM settings, row 3, pronunciate voiceover off.
Okay, so I've turned that voiceover off. All right, hopefully that demo worked for you guys. I know it's a little bit funky doing it from a webcam. All right, so Rick just asked a question about what platforms does the voice feature support. So all platforms, as long as it is a TV platform. This is actually not required on mobile or web. It was only required on our TV support platforms. So Fire TV, Android TV, Roku, and Apple TV all support this feature. And there is documentation in the portal 1.13 that specifically goes through how it works on the different platforms. Okay, let's go to another area inside of the portal here. I'm back at the home screen for the portal. And what we're going to do is take a look at the scheduled releases for 1.15, 1.16. Again, we break it out across client and server. So here are all of the items that we are scheduled to release. 1.15 is down here. And we also kind of lay out what date the release is scheduled to end on or end by at a high level. Again, going back to what I was saying before, the way that we work is we hit the early March timeframe, for example, on this 1.15 client release from a reference perspective, and then there is a couple of days to a week or so that we'll need to. It may actually take longer in some cases. I'm not exactly sure what the status of our turnaround time on that is, but I don't believe it's too much longer than a week or so. And so by the time that we release a new version in early March, you may not actually get it till closer to mid-March in some cases. And so just be aware of that. We are also in 1.15 still pretty focused on resiliency, stability, performance items. So 1.15 is likely to be our last release that is so heavily dedicated to those things. We really feel like we listed out a bunch of items, one to end, that we wanted to address. And we have made such good progress against that list over the last release, and we expect to do the same over the upcoming release, that we feel like more focus on resiliency and stability beyond this release to the same degree, like, such a dedicated release is actually not going to be the right call from an ROI perspective. We'll start getting into areas of stability that are not as actually high leverage as actually delivering new features. So that inflection point happens in 1.15. In 1.16, there's still going to be a pretty heavy focus on resiliency, but as a percentage of our overall budget, it will be probably less than a fully dedicated release like it's been in 1.14 and 1.15. So when you come to the scheduled releases here, you can dive into each one of these things if you have questions, on any particular area or feature that is being announced as a scheduled feature. You can again leave those comments here. Happy to respond. Also, just a refresher from what you will have likely already heard during your kickoff meeting is that the MobiTV approach is to ship every 6 weeks. That is our approach. That is the agile way, is to ship on time regardless of what is ready to ship, right? So what we do is we go through an exercise where we schedule what we think we can ship based off of our velocity and how big we expect the feature to be. Sometimes we get that wrong, and so we get it wrong in a good way, some cases where we'll have overestimated the effort and realize that we're able to support it much more quickly than we thought. We also have it happen the other way where we underestimated it. It's turned out to be more complicated than we thought and don't end up shipping it during the time frame that it was scheduled to ship in. And that is okay. That is the way that Agile works. We're still adding value to the market every 6 weeks, and that is the thing that you can rely on. And you can also rely on us doing the best that we can to prioritize the highest value features and make sure that our resources are focused around those things, as opposed to focused on features that may be easier to ship, but that are not as high value. And so that's kind of the Agile way. In this particular case, I'm not going to dive into the specific services that are getting love in 1.15 server, but they are called out there in the article. The tool that we're using to migrate recordings when we switch from one-to-one channels is also being finished up, so it's a little bit less of a manual process. And then this QVBR feature, this is more media related, basically allows us to use this technology to decrease the bandwidth that is required by our streaming media, and then also to reduce the file size of the media files as well. So this QVBR is kind of cool technology that we've now tested and made available inside of our service, if you're interested. Coming back over here to 1.15 on the client side. Actually, before we move on, I'm going to check and see if there's any questions here. Nope, no questions. Good. All right, on the 1.15 client side, the high level here is these two items below are resiliency focused, and this top one here is content provider focused. So, as you guys know, we're doing something pretty unique in the industry. This whole outsourced, completely TV as a service model is unprecedented. There are other people who are trying to dive into the app-based world, and they're doing it in their own way, but none to the extent that basically provides a fully featured multi-screen outsourced TV as a service like MobiTV. And so that uniqueness of our platform has required that we work pretty extensively with our content providers to make sure that they feel comfortable with our implementation. And the result has been a lot of audience measurement SDKs and a lot of branding requirements and advertising requirements and so on and so forth. So Adobe Video Analytics is one of multiple services that we now support as part of our transport rights, and more to come. So 1.15 is that from a client perspective. This one just turns out to be a pretty challenging feature. Just the level, the extent to which they want to report certain actions inside the application. So anyways, this other one here, we are updating our error codes to be a little bit more specific to help our engineers identify root causes more quickly. And as we were mentioning before, there's a more global take on how to optimize the retry logic across all services, as opposed to the cherry picking of the ones that we mentioned in 1.14. So our 1.15 release is really, really focused again on resiliency and a couple of these content provider features. In 1.16, there's kind of a similar approach. So there's not, the sex appeal of these features from like a core user experience perspective is no more sexy than just the ability to have supreme confidence that we are making sure that this is a service that does not have technical struggles as we continue to grow. We've just seen some sad stories in the industry of very large companies who are not taking the preparations. I mean, even Amazon is struggling. YouTube has talked about some of the outages that they've seen, their customers have complained about. We want to make sure that we are taking more steps than anybody, that we are more above reproach than anybody in terms of stability. So that has just been a focus for these early releases in 2019. Going back to, so 1.16, this is the release that comes out in April. So on server, it's going to be the early part of the month, and then for the client, the mid part of the month. Somebody asked a question earlier before about when we would see blackouts for ESPN, and the answer for that is right now we're scheduling that as part of our 1.16 server release, so early April. And we'll be clubbing together the work that we've done on ESPN side with the NBCU and NFL side. So that is, yeah. that's the priority as of right now. And then same thing like any other article, you can click on this and ask questions, right? So if you want to have more details about the particular item, feel free to leave a comment. Sometimes we'll have more details when you dive in, aside from just the headline. And so feel free to dive in, follow the page, so on and so forth. We also are usually through, in coordination with some of our new customers, we'll often assess new encoders, live encoders, bot encoders, etc. And one of the new encoders that we are going to support, currently scheduled for 1.16, is this Wowza live encoders, excuse me. And then bot ingestion monitoring tooling. So as part of the transport rights, we now get a ton of VOD into our national data center. At least we have the rights to it. And so we're setting up the VOD ingestion with each of the VOD providers. And we're noticing that is it's a little bit of a tricky process to have a good snapshot at any given time what the health of that VOD ingestion is. Oftentimes the content provider themselves is just, not organized the feeds in the right way, or it's kind of like drop the feed off or whatever. So we want to make sure that we're moving quickly to address the issues that are happening inside of the VOD ingestion funnel. Also upgrading CentOS 7. We generally do tech upgrades as a matter of course for the technologies that we're using inside of the service. And then on 1.16 client, a couple of things to call out here. So ESPN transport rights come with more than just, we need to support more than just dynamic blackouts, or a couple more audience measurements things. And, there's a handful of requirements that we have questions about. And so we're kind of working with those guys on what the exact implementation will be. So the details of this is still kind of being worked out. But we have put this placeholder item here to represent any remaining work for the ESPN transport rights from a client perspective. We also are currently planning and under the investigation phase around an unlimited DVR for 30 days approach for DVR. So right now, the way that we allow our customers to take DVR to market is to basically sell it in 50-hour or 100-hour increments to their users. So, hey, I ran out of space. I need to buy more DVR space. Let me get another 50 hours. And they call you guys up. They get the new offer, and now they have more DVR space. And they can hold on to those DVR assets for as long as they want on average. In general, there are a couple of content providers that have requirements that need to expire DVR assets after a certain number of days. We have seen that there are there is data that supports this idea that if you don't watch your recording within the first handful of days, that you may not ever end up watching it. And so YouTube TV has this approach with DVR where you can record as much as you want, whatever you want. But the catch is that those items, they expire after 30 days. And so the suspicion, I think, is that YouTube TV has realized that you get more engagement out of the DVR feature without it necessarily causing a huge storage impact, because we're auto expiring a lot of the assets after 30 days, or all the assets really. So that is a feature that we are investigating. It would be a configurable option for customers considering their go-to-market options. We also are working with a couple of Canadian customers now, and there are some unique set-top box requirements that we need to support. And then we also, as part of our resiliency stability effort, we want to have a redundant data center for disaster recovery. So in cases where our primary center based out of Sacramento is for whatever reason, there's like an earthquake or whatever, something crazy like that, that we would have a redundant data center. I believe it'll be based out of Atlanta, and make sure that the user experience is not heavily impacted by those types of disasters. And then Alexa is just like this painful thing. We've decided to focus on this resiliency stuff. We thought that was a much higher priority by far. But the casualty of all that focus has been our working with Amazon to get Alexa to a place where we can support it in the the proper way, like the actual Alexa video skill. When we had built support for Alexa earlier last year and took the skill to be certified by Amazon, we were informed that the requirements had been updated and we needed to update our implementation. And ever since then, we've been struggling to prioritize it because of our focus on transport rights and the stability efforts. And so we think we have some capacity to get to Alexa. It is a little bit at risk based off our early assessments, but we will keep you posted on that. That's kind of our plan right now. So those are our scheduled releases, all of the features. And if we go back to our snazzy slide deck here, we went through the demo, we talked about scheduled features, and I believe that's it, guys. Let's take a little bit of time here to ask questions if you have them. Anything that you feel that I can help you with right now. In terms of time, it looks like we're coming up, we have about 15 minutes left. So, if there are any questions right now is a good time to ask them. As we're waiting for you guys to kind of think through any questions that you may have, just some final thoughts here. We will make this available in the portal. We'll make it available to account managers and release managers for sharing. And so that's with regard to the webinar. If you have any questions that were not covered today and that are not in the knowledge base, we're here to help. We are also planning to have a pretty fun user group at WEC for those of you who are NCTC members in Atlanta, I believe in February. So we hope to see you guys there. We'll be talking through, basically we're going to be doing something similar to last time with different topics where we bring up a panel of customers to talk about their experiences, their best practices, and being successful with our platform. So should be a great time. We'll also go over a couple of other announcements, new features that we'd like to announce, etc. All right, so we got a couple of questions coming my way. Let's see here. Update on ad insertion. Yes, I can give an update on ad insertion. So I assume we're referring to dynamic ad insertion. There is an article inside of the portal that talks about DAI, as it's referred to, the dynamic ad insertion. And the way that we are working to support that is by updating our technology to play nicely, basically, with Freewheel and Google Ad Server and SpotX and really any of these modern ad decisioning servers that run their technology via a vast compliance integration with a manifest manipulator that we have now integrated. And so that's the work that we're doing. The status of DAI is that we are now beyond our proof of concept. We are working to take the work that we did on our proof of concept and close the gap between that and what we think needs to exist in the implementation to be ready for production. As you mentioned, as you saw in the scheduled releases, DAI is not there. So it's not scheduled to release in 1.16, which is the mid-April timeframe. We do believe early indications, we haven't scheduled it, but early indications are that we will be shipping that in 1.17 timeframe, which is the early June-ish. So that's the answer to that question. I also kind of wanted to just give out a readout on Roku. As you guys probably have heard, Roku as a platform is a little bit challenging for pay TV providers. We've seen a handful of other software, pay TV enablers like ourselves struggle to make the app align with the business model of Roku. This is everybody, not just any particular type. Comcast and all of those guys are basically buckling to the demands of Roku because it is such a large percentage of the market, Roku is requiring in-app purchases. And so basically what that means is that if you sell a service, that service needs to be available. If it's a video service that is consumed inside of the Roku app, that service should be merchandised and purchasable from inside of the Roku app. And they want that because they take a commission off of all purchases that happen inside the Roku app. That is true for Amazon and Apple and Android. The only difference is that the Apple, Android, Amazon guys don't require you to support in-app purchases. They allow you to support it, but they don't require it. In the case of Roku, they are requiring it. And there's some intricacies that cause issues there because we don't own the billing. Mostly our integrations are such that your billing system is the one that is the brains, and we are really just a mirror for what offers exist and what users are subscribed to what offers. We would need to update the integration that we have with your billing system in order to support in-app purchases, and it's not an easy integration. It would take some time. We're willing to prioritize it, but a lot of the work is going to fall on the actual billing system software that you guys use, and so it's just tricky. It's messy, and so we're working with the Roku guys, trying to help them understand what their options are, what I think is palatable to you guys, and what still aligns with their business model, and yada yada. We're kind of working on a master agreement right now, in part with the NCTC, and then also for members who are not in the NCTC. We want to have an agreement with Roku that will allow us to get back to a place where we can submit our applications and have them approved. Right now, they've kind of put all those on hold while we work through these negotiations. And we're in a positive place, I think. None of the apps have been threatened to be removed, and they've assured us that that will not happen until we've determined that we agree on certain terms, and that for our customers who decide that they don't like those terms, they can choose to turn off the channel from the Roku store. For those who are willing to accept the terms of Roku, then they'll make sure that you are able to get your app into their channel store, and that it is updated as frequently as you like, and so on and so forth. So that's the status. We don't have a lot more improvement to talk, detail to talk about in those Roku conversations, except for that they are ongoing. One thing that we have asked them is specifically with regard to the CVAA or FCC requirements for the Talking Guide. We're out of compliance because they won't allow us to update the Roku apps. They're until we get done with these negotiations. And so I've said, look, guys, we got to get in compliance. So please consider allowing us to do an update for those customers who already have their apps in the channel store. Unfortunately, new customers won't be able to get their apps into the channel store until we're done with the negotiation. But for the customers who do have their channel store app in Roku, we have requested that we be able to do a version upgrade to support that CVAA requirement. Okay, lots of talking from me. Sorry about that. One question from LCI is, do we have documentation for best practices for CSRs? That is a great, fantastic question. So 2019, we have set a goal to dedicate resources here internally to focus on training up the various constituencies at our customers. So CSRs, marketing teams, product folks, install technicians, door-to-door salespeople, retail salespeople, whoever it is that is in their own way a representative of the products that we've built for you guys. We want them to be as trained and motivated and supported as possible. So we don't have the documentation and specifically that you're referring to right now in terms of best practices, but what we have done is organized ourselves to now have resources and give them space to focus on creating this type of content. So that is really a segue into what we'll be talking a lot about at WEC at the end of February. So if you don't mind, I'll put a pin in that one until we do the user group in February. We have a question around understanding what the actual, like the telemetry or the analytics that represents the actual user experience that a user is having, when they call into a customer service experience, for example. We do have tools that allow for you to see all of the events associated with the account in real time, available to you in our beta version of our analytics tool. If you do not have access to that analytics tool, this is the Countly analytics tool that we use. Please let us know, and we will get you set up with that and train you on how to identify the errors that a specific user is seeing, and to have a good idea of what the user experience is for a particular user across all the different devices and across all the different profiles on the account. So that's the answer to that question. I think that's more of like a let's get trained up. If you're not able to see that, so reach out to your rep on the MobiTV side. We also have a question here. Have you set up, tested the Kaon and Amino boxes with a hard load into the app? In other words, bypassing the menu and automatically loading the app. This would be ideal for subscribers with minimal technical knowledge and or bulk deployments. So 100% agree. Kaon and Amino, the way that we have implemented that is there's really two ways to do a managed set-top box implementation. The way that we've done it has been our fastest path to support for Kaon and Amino. It's not the standard path though. The path that we've chosen to get to market quickly is to work with Kaon and Amino such that when the user they start a new device session, so they turn on the device, that once the device has gone through its boot up sequence, so you'll see like a splash screen, and that splash screen can be customized, that the application, the MobiTV app that is branded for you guys' brand, will actually be invoked by the operating system to appear as if it is the home screen of the device. So that's the way that works. On the remote control, there will be a button that is like a Google button. And when the user selects that, it will close what the user thinks is the home experience, but what is actually the app, the exact same app that you would see on a retail device. It will close that and navigate the user to the Android, the actual Android home screen, the OS of the home screen of the OS. And so in order for it, at that point, the user will see, all the apps associated with, their device, and one of which would be your app, and that would be in the first spot on the home screen of the OS. And then anytime that a user does a search at the OS level, the search results, what we're currently working on. In fact, there's a demo today of the catalog export, which is basically going to allow us to push you guys' catalog to Android so that when you do a search at the OS level on your managed set-top box, all of the content inside of your catalog appears in that OS search screen. So that's the way that we've done the implementation. We map all of the buttons in the remote, like the number buttons and the guide button and all of that stuff, back into the application so that no matter where you are in the app, let's say you're in Netflix as a user, if you hit the guide button, and what would happen is the Netflix app would close and it would deep link the user into the actual MobiTV app, and to the screen specifically, the guide screen specifically inside of the MobiTV app, so that it kind of approximates this feeling that that users are engaging with a device where the home screen feels like it's your application, even though from a technical perspective it isn't. We do have on the roadmap what they call an Android launcher, and that is the more standard way of doing it. But the user experience gains are they're significant in some ways, but I would say overall marginal compared to some of the other stuff that we want to do. And so for now, we're not scheduling that until there's a more obvious opportunity with that work. So that is the Kaon and the Amino implementation. We're also working with SEMC, which is another really large manufacturer you may want to check out. We haven't officially claimed support for that yet, but we are in process. Okay, I think those are all of the questions that I see here in the chat. Let's see here. I think we're looking good then, guys. This is about 5 minutes left. I just want to take the opportunity to thank you guys for such an awesome 2018 and bearing with us as we just trailblaze. I mean, that's what's going on right now. Is we are trailblazing together this really disruptive approach to pay TV. The hope being that we can take headache off of you guys' plate and make a product that is so marketable that you can go out. It's no longer a question of how do we maintain subscribers, how do we fight against the trend of pay TV subscribers. What we want to get to a place where that is not the question. The question is, how do we steal tons of subscribers from from the big guys, from the YouTube TVs and the DirecTV Nows and the Comcasts and a lot of these guys out there who are, in most of our customers' cases, a factor in your success with video. We want to be killing it out there. And this type of engagement, I think, is helpful. If there are things that you think that we could do better next time, please let us know. And I think I'll end it with that. I really appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you next time. Thank you.